It's my great pleasure to introduce our guest this afternoon, Daniel Laskarin. He's here from Victoria, British Columbia. He flew in last night, so he was a little jet lagged this morning, but I think he's doing okay right now. He seems to have kind of revived. So we're really grateful for his long trip here. Really pleased that he could be part of the Visiting Artist Series that is organized every year by the Owens Art Gallery, the Fine Art Department at Mount Allison, and Strutson Fawcett Media Arts Center. Daniel, as I mentioned, is from Victoria. He's a teacher at the University of Victoria, and he's also the head of the Fine Art Department there. He got his BA from Simon Fraser University, and his MFA from the University of California. Daniel has exhibited in Canada and internationally in exhibitions at the Khyber in Halifax, at Articule, Open Space, Plug-in, the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, the Charles H. Scott Gallery, and at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery in an exhibition entitled It Might Not Take That Long. Daniel has also done a number of public artworks, including Working Landscape in 1988, which I believe is in the collection of the City of Vancouver.
98. 98.
1998. He's also received attention critically, including an article in Border Crossings with the nice little title, Victoria's Secret. Daniel's works incorporate fabricated items, video, and found objects in unconventional ways to speak about the complexity of visual experience. For his show at Plug-in, the gallery stated that, quote, he produces surreal objects and surfaces that nestle somewhere between cultural artifacts and found objects from the animal kingdom. The mixed media work of Laskarin has always brought elements of nature and culture together to underline the applied artificiality and tenuous meanings used to construct and separate these worlds. The horror of decorative pattern of deer antlers, a nervous, vibrating hunting trophy, and luminescent apparitions of the disappearing forest. These are some of the images found in Laskarin's work. They suggest that nature and culture are often laced together with thickly seductive humor. Before I bring Daniel up, I just want to make an acknowledgement that his visit is funded by a grant from the Canada Council to the Department of Fine Arts, with additional support from Struts Gallery and the Owens, and also from the Center for Canadian Studies at Mount Allison. So I'd like to ask you to join me in giving a warm, warm welcome to Daniel Laskarin.
Thank you. This is kind of exciting. There's a great crowd. And thank you to Jemmy and Jennifer and everyone else who's responsible for my getting here. It's been a nice trip so far. Yeah, I like to listen to those introductions when they happen, because it kind of, I go, oh, that's what I'm doing. It all seems so much clearer. You know, mostly I'm just pretty confused. And actually, mostly I try to insist on that confusion, because if I'm going to be working in some kind of creative, imaginative space, and I'm not confused and not lost, then I'm not someplace new. So I try to hold on to that, and it's one of the keystones that will kind of weave itself maybe through my work here a little bit. And of course, then there's technology, and we're still in the Model T days of these computers, I think. So this one will do one thing at a time really well. It's actually a really good computer, so it'll either show the videos or show the slides. So I'm going to have to bump back and forth between them a little bit, and there's some lumps. There weren't lumps yesterday, but that's because I wasn't here yet. So I will just begin. Oh, no, my other beginning. I've got many beginning points, and then it never ends. My other beginning point was the title of this lecture series, The Dead Horse. And, you know, that was kind of a funny thing to see, and so I thought maybe I'd start my talk with the dead horse story. And I don't know if it's true or if it's not. My grandfather died when I was very young. I kind of knew him. But he had previously served in World War I. And he was a farm boy from South Ontario, so, you know, he'd seen some things. And he never talked about his World War I experience, except he was known to have said, "I used to sit on a dead horse now and then to eat my lunch." Not all the guys would do that. That's my dead horse story. I don't know. How does it fit in with everything else? We'll find out. I think it fits in. I can weave it in, you know? And I can weave it in by talking about just the fact that I don't know if it's true or if it's not, but it's necessary for me to make the vision of its truth in order for it to be resonant for me. And when it is, then it's like fascinating and horrific all at the same time, and it seems to like encapsulate something really fundamental about that historical period and those events and that person. It wraps it all up. But then maybe it's just a veil. Maybe it's just a mist, right? We'll see. So this, I'm going to start, as we look at works, going to start with a work that I did when I was in grad school. I was really lucky. I was able to study with Charles Ray, and Nancy Rubens, Paul McCarthy, and we hung out with Chris Burden, who is married to Nancy Rubens. So it's like a pretty great opportunity. I made this piece, and Charlie said, "That's the best piece you've made yet. You don't know it, but it's really important." And he was right. So what it is I had this steel block about this big. And I was interested in, I'm still interested in, the idea of trying to know anything at all. Like whether I try to know my grandfather's story or what my pen looks like or anything. And different forms of knowledge. So I had this steel block. It was just sitting incidentally on my work table for quite a long time. And I started writing about it, just describing it. And I wrote and I wrote and wrote. Over the space of a couple of months, I wrote this, pages and pages, just blankly describing what this thing looked like. It's 8.5 inches long, 1 inch thick, and 3 inches wide. And I described all the little rust spots on it and all the marks on it. And finally, I had all these pages, and I kind of distilled out anything that was too poetic or too exciting or energetic. And so it was just like as neutral a description as I could possibly make of this stupid object. And it was, when you pick it up, you know it all. You know all those things about it already, like that, instantly. You know it visually. You know it sensorially, right? You don't need the application of the linguistic description in order to know this. They're two different orders of knowing, two entirely different ways of knowing. So when I showed the work, I just put it on a work table, shone a light on it, and I transcribed, I read my writings into this blank tape. So I had an hour-long tape describing this thing. And the tape just droned on and on and on. I read it really flatly. And what I was trying to do was create a situation for my audience, for the viewers of the work, where they would see the block, get it, and then hear this other kind of knowing about it. So to create the situation of these two ways of knowing about this one simple object, and hopefully get caught a little bit in between, right? Hopefully kind of get into the crack between those two ways of knowing and interject a little bit of uncertainty about a very simple thing. And it was positioned not so that you would sit there and listen to this tape for an hour. I've never listened to the tape from one end to the other because it's pretty boring, and it wasn't meant for that to happen. One reviewer, when I showed this later on, one reviewer did listen to the whole thing and complained in the review about the fact that it was boring. And I thought, oh man, that's a lot of listening. That's hard work. But that fundamental little object led to another series of works, and I'll talk a little bit about them. This is a schematic drawing for an installation I did in LA. I was interested, again, that same theme between kinds of knowing, or between knowing and trying to rip away the things that we know in order to get at what might actually be there. Because we know so much, and it's all like pre-constructed for us. So it's hard to rip away what we know to actually see anything. So I made this in my studio, which is also something of a public building. This is an industrial steel door, and this is a window. And across here are some other elements that I'll show you in a minute. Here's the window. The window was modeled after the architecture of Thomas Jefferson, one of America's first presidents, who also articulated the neoclassicism that dominates a lot of American federal buildings. And as an architect, he tried to build an architecture that would be the vision of the American Republic, the vision of America. So it was neoclassical and idealized in his eyes. This window I just made from photographs of his house at Jefferson's own home at Monticello. And it was just built in a workmanlike way, you know, standard carpentry. This is what you see outside it. So what I was interested in doing was bringing together the image, Jefferson's ideal notion of America, and the image of what America really looked like. So this is just what, you know, this was LA. Opposite the wall, or opposite the window, mounted on the wall, is a little truncated shelf about this long. And it too was taken from Jefferson's house at Monticello. It was excerpted from a mantelpiece over a fireplace. And this was finished to an ideal condition. It had like 20 coats of lacquer. And you know, I made it as pristine as I could. Funny little thing happened there. When you try to make something idealized, you know, the ideal thing doesn't show any marks of labor. Labor is erased from it, right? So I made this and sanded it all really nicely and primed it, wet sanded it, lacquered it with 2 or 3 coats of lacquer, and then I could see all the scratches I'd missed. So I got finer sandpaper and body filler and filled it and polished it down more and re-lacquered it. And then all those scratches I could see before, they were gone, but I could see the smaller scratches. And so I went through this process again and again. I was down to like 1,200 grit sandpaper, wet sanding, and finally I realized that all it was doing was making my eyesight better because I could see smaller and smaller and smaller flaws in this perfect thing. It's one of the problems with, I guess I have to go back, with the whole notion of trying to aspire to perfection. Above the shelf is a mirror, and between the mirror and the shelf is an optical lens, basically a magnifying glass. And what happens is that the mirror bounces the light through the lens, and you end up with a little picture about this big of the window and what lies beyond it. There we go. So another kind of reiteration of the steel block thing, right? Where I put the viewer between the opportunity to look out through the window and have this already complex experience on the one hand, and on the other hand, they could look at the same thing as an image. Picture, object, text, object. So it's like ways that we're thinking about ways that we could construct knowledge. And the image was better than I could have hoped for because it kind of melted right into the surface of the shelf. After that, I did another work related. And this is again the schematic for it. Setting up this relationship between different kinds of objects. You would walk into the gallery space, 14-foot ceilings. So this tree is from here to the top of the root ball, 12 feet tall. It hung upside down for a month. Every night I'd water it, put grow lights underneath it. It was a bit confused, but it, that's okay. It did all right. So you'd walk in out of the hot California environment, hot, dry LA sunshine, into this room which was dark and moist and had the scent of this tree. It's a camphor tree, a beautiful scent. And it was like just this kind of nice experience. And people would walk in, oh yeah, okay, there's a tree upside down. Well, in LA you see everything. You know that one of the big shocks for me in going there was that every idea I'd ever had was already manifested and commercialized and available in several versions. And the other shock was that everything was something else. So the guy who who drove the shuttle bus to the airport, he wasn't really a shuttle bus driver, he was really a DJ. My favorite store in LA was, what was it? It was the Kosher Nostra Dutch Deli. You never know where you are, or you never know what anything is, which makes LA really fascinating, because like, how do you pull these veils aside and find out what the city is? I don't know. It's a city you can parallel park at 70 miles an hour on the freeway. That's pretty cool. And sometimes you can cross 6 lanes of traffic in one swoop. That is so nice. You walk in, so you get this tree. It's upside down, and you know, it's a little quick hit. And after a while, you notice that on the other end of the room, there's another object. And as you approach it, this is what's down there. And it's a simple steel shelf. And there were 23 optical lenses. And they're just magnifying glasses. Some came out of used camera equipment. Some I got from an eyeglass supply store. And I put each of them on a little steel post just to hold it up. Each lens has a different focal length, right? And the different sizes of the lenses lead to different brightnesses. So each lens cast a different image of the tree onto the wall. And of course, the tree was upside down. The lens cast the image right side up. It's high school science, but it's still magic. And so it was called Forest for the Tree. And here again, you know, you come in, you're in this space, you're between this beautiful and beautifully seductive image and this real object, this real tree thing, which is kind of, people get caught in between the two. Or that was my hope. One of the other things that this has to do with is how we hold on to things. You know what? We have a picture of people we love sitting nearby just to help them, make them present, keep them close to us. We write things down to hold them in our minds. Because, in fact, we can't really remember that much. Details slip away. We try to hold on to things. And as we hold on to things, we've developed, there are different devices for doing it, right? Different kinds of knowing for doing it. Writing about it is one. But these optical pieces, I did several variations of them. And in each case, I tried to tailor the installation to what I was confronted with. So this is a version of it, and I'm not going to show you a bunch of images of these. This is a version of it that I showed in Norwich in England. And I had this bay window, and it was kind of sweet because through this bay, you can move the camera. Through this bay window here, there was a 19th century, the corner of a 19th century English garden. And through this corner here was a 1970s brick institutional building. So there are these two images of England, and the building that this is housed in was built at the turn of the 20th century, 19th, 20th. And the architectural style was also kind of commingled. So I developed these shelves which had a kind of faux neoclassical cast iron base and then an elevated metal superstructure with a plastic laminate on the top. So trying to just materially carry things through the same kind of transition, historical transition that was here. And then the images on each of the shelves were, of course, what lay out the window. So they were also two different things. There's the detail. Oh, and this one, the supports for the lenses, I fabricated in the manner of 19th century scientific instruments. Sometimes people were amazed when one person was amazed when the images were in color. And somebody else was amazed when a bird flew through it, because it looks just like a photograph, but it was a living image. Later on, well, actually, the Norwich exhibition was after this piece that is up here now. This is called Trophy. I did another variation of those optical ones in Winnipeg, where I built the shelving units out of used tractor parts and used truck mirrors to guide the light. But this work, Trophy, has more to do with our attempt to hold on to things. Because I was thinking about, what we do if we go hunting, where we go out, and what trophies are about, and how they try to hold on to a memory. And the memory that somebody's trying to hold on to is maybe like, it's also got to do with showing off, but with that moment of finding the prized deer and killing it. And this very kind of Canadian experience. And then you take the deer's head and you mount it, because you want, in a way, it's a way to help hold on to that experience. And as you hold on to it, you're left with a kind of dead deer head on your wall. So this piece is mounted on felt, which is traditionally, as scholars of Joseph Beuys will know, that's how I learned about it anyway. Felt was traditionally made from deer or rabbit hair. So it's mounted on felt, and it's I hollowed out the head, and it quivers, so it's vibrating really fast. And what happens is that from any kind of distance, you just see it, and it looks much like it's in the slide here. But I always showed it in such a way that you could approach it, and when you get up to it and try to get a good vision of it so you can see it clearly, you can't, because it's quivering. So it's blurry, it's out of focus, and it's only in focus when you're far away from it. So I was really interested in the idea that as with a memory, if you try to get really close and zoom in on it and really get to the specifics of it, the harder you look, the more it seems to slip away from you. And after that, it was just trophies all over the place. So this is 64 sets of identical deer antlers cast out of polyurethane foam, a kind of Baroque three-dimensional wallpaper that just emerged from the, playing around with this idea of the trophies. And also the opticality of this pattern was pretty interesting to me. These other things that the work, when I'm working, it's not about one-dimensional or one thought. It's about like this field of thoughts, and I try to pull a string out of it for a moment or so. I thought of these as being kind of, here's a side view, prosthetics for failed hunters. And they generated, I showed them in Vancouver, and they generated a lot of controversy for a little while in the local area, because a lot of people mistook them for real and were really angry with the people running the exhibition space because I'd killed all these animals. And there was one couple that went in and started really treating the space owners very aggressively. They said, well, relax, they're just plastic. And then they just did like a turn like this and started ranting about the misuse of plastics and how horrible they were for the environment. Oh, geez, time to go home. Okay, and then finally, it's not a dead horse, okay? It's a dead bear. And this work is called Polar Drift. And now I have to duck out of this software, and I want to screen the video footage of it. Polar Drift is quite simply a kind of pathetic restitution. I wanted to do something that would revive or resuscitate this polar bear. And so I built a mechanism that would allow it to walk around the gallery space and look at art. It's about 8 feet long. I never named it. I didn't know if it was a girl or a boy. So there's an array of ultrasonic sensors built into it. And it will avoid whatever objects are in front of it. And if you go and stand in front of it, it'll turn away from you. And it would dodge something as small and spindly as chair legs, which was, I was pretty stoked by that. The problem is it took a little while to conceive of it. But then it took me 8 months to learn how to do the robotics and the electronics to make it work. And if I were smarter or richer, I probably would have hired somebody to do that. But this is one where Daniel Jolliffe had to help me at the final stages because I was having trouble with the electronics, with the ultrasound sensors. And he aimed me at some good circuitry and stuff. So, what am I doing? No, I want Z. Okay. This all worked way more smoothly until it actually had to work. Okay, there we go. And I've worked off and on with, a variety of assemblage things, and for this piece, I was just interested in these little tape loops and singing. I hired a singer and endless work. Somehow I was like always working and just like trying to get things done. And so I hired a singer to sing. I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass my time away. And just that part of the song. And then it's looped endlessly. So this would just sit in my studio and play endlessly. And I'd have it playing for 8 hours while I'd be working at other stuff. It was pretty cool because you phase out. I don't know how many of you know about the term aphasia. A guy named Oliver Sacks wrote about it in the book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Great book. And so I was interested in this idea of aphasia. And what happens with aphasia is, in a sense, that your mind slips out of phase with the sounds that you're hearing. And they don't make sense, in a way. You go out of phase. Your mind and perception go out of phase with each other. And I thought that was pretty cool because when that happens, anything can happen. Something can become something else. You can get out of where you are and get to someplace else. Now, if it happens all the time, you're pretty much hooped. But if it happens momentarily, it's maybe an opportunity. And it started to happen with this piece when it played all day. Because there would be times when I wouldn't be listening. You know how your attention wanders. And then I'd come back into the listening, and I wouldn't understand the song at all. Because I'd start listening in the middle of a word, and it would flow into the next word. And it would take like a while, probably sometimes like 10 or 15 seconds at worst, to get it back into phase again. And then it was fine. So that was pretty interesting as a discovered phenomenon. This is the choral version. It's the same thing, but 3 of them. More is okay. Somewhere in here, I nailed a commission, my first public art commission, for the city of Vancouver. And a lot of these other concerns, I tried to feed them in. It's a funny thing about public art because it's a really different world. You have to appeal, you've got a different audience, a different set of expectations about what's going on, and different logistics, also a different economy. Here I am making works that maybe cost me $1,000, $1,500 tops. And all of a sudden I got this thing and it was like a $100,000 budget. What a great opportunity to screw up, which I promptly did. I made a $200,000 work on a $100,000 budget. I'm still paying for it. I managed to raise an extra $50,000 partway through. But the other 50 came out of, well, that was, my life savings. I was gone. But it was an interesting project. It was in a public square, frequented by people who would go there and sit and have lunch, in downtown Vancouver, business district, former working area, dockside kind of working area, now money area. And I wanted to make a public work that would not be monumental and not loom over people, something that could be like stealth art that could slip in there. But I also wanted to involve some of my own studio ideas and just like feed them out into this other avenue. So I built this work. It's got 4 circular platforms. I don't know how the perspective shows, but it's 20 feet. The big disc is 20 feet across. And then they scale down respectively from that. And each circular platform rotates. And they rotate in the time spans of the traditional 40-hour work week. And the materials are the materials of a dock, of the wharves in the Vancouver area. Steel, wood, timbers and concrete frame. So the big turntable turns once every 40 hours. The next one down, marking the 8-hour workday, turns once every 8 hours. The third one rotates once an hour for the unit of measure, or perhaps the lunch break. And the fourth one is stationary. Now, the city's talking about funding. I finished this in 1998. And the city's talking now about funding the fourth turntable to get it going. I left it stationary, in part because I ran out of funds, and in part because I just conceived of it as the unemployment turntable. We all know about that a little bit. So why working landscape? Well, landscape is a big part of certainly Canadian art practices and a big part of British Columbia art practices. British Columbia isn't much other than landscape, really. And I was interested in the idea of the landscape as a fixed and not fixed thing. So when we think of the natural landscape, we may think of something permanent, grand, eternal, natural, all those pleasant adjectives. But in fact, it's way more dynamic and living than that. So by putting, each platform has a planter, just fabricated out of steel and allowed to rust, out near the periphery, park bench that you can sit on. So as they turn, they are sometimes all clustered together, sometimes spread apart. And so as you walk past it and look past it, and as you look past it from Hastings Street, you can see some of the mountains and trees and the general natural, peekaboo views of the general natural landscape of British Columbia. So, and then in the foreground are these 4 trees that are sometimes like this, sometimes like this, so that the whole landscape keeps moving. And it was also the kind of thing where you might not notice it for a long time because it's happening pretty slowly. And then one day it's kind of, wait a minute, there's something changed here. And I like those little momentary shifts, You wake up, you're snoozing away, walking down the street, and all of a sudden something pokes you a little bit, nudges, just a little nudge. There were surprises like that worked pretty nicely. This guy, I just happened to be there. He had been sitting reading his book and then looked up, and it was just like he didn't quite know. He was having that moment. And the city wanted a plaque, didactic plaque, explaining everything that was happening. And I didn't want to do that, because I wanted it. Once you get the plaque, you go there, you read the plaque, you know the story, you're done, right? You don't get the experience, because you've got the knowledge, so then you don't get the experience. Fortunately, my contract said that I had final veto over whatever was on the plaque, and I just vetoed everything except the names and the funders. And that was important because it's a work that is meant to unfold really slowly, not something that you get like that and be done with, right? But the one that might exist for a longer period of time. And I was interested also in people finding out about it sort of through word of mouth and by chance. And sure enough, you would hear, when I was in the finishing stages, I would hear people as they walked by talking about what was going on. And usually they'd get the story wrong or partly right and partly wrong, but I figured that was okay. It would have its own, it would have its own narrative eventually. And it'd be a narrative constructed by the people familiar with the area. When we go to Rome to the Trevi Fountain, we don't need a didactic panel to tell us that we're looking at art, right? We have the experience of it. On the 8-hour turntable once when I was there, 4 women came and sat down, kicked off their shoes went down onto the concrete step. They crossed their legs and sat and had lunch. And about 20 minutes later, the turntable, their shoes were 5 or 6 feet away from them. And they looked up, they were done their lunch. Where's our shoes? Oh, they're over there. What? Oh, and one of them said, oh, I know, this is that project where blah, 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 and started to explain it. I thought, that's an ideal moment. That's like this guy's aha moment. It's sweet. Yeah, well, I can't say that in the front of the class, can I? All right. And this is out of order. This was another a project that I did in Algeria. Maybe I'll have time to come back to So I like these moments of disorder, these moments of disarray that can be constructed or that interject themselves into our lives. And this happened like that. Many years before, I acquired a Campbell's soup can signed by Andy Warhol. You can see his signature here. You know, he would do this for, it's like autograph signing, really. I think he gave him $5 or something. I don't know. Anyway, I'd acquired the soup can, and it sat up on a shelf. And one day I noticed that the can wasn't upright anymore. It was tilted over a little bit, and I thought, that's not good. That can should have a flat bottom. And I looked at it, and it was bulged on both ends. And I thought, this is not ordinary canned soup anymore. There's something going on in here, and this thing's going to pop. What am I going to do with it? So I very quickly thought, I want to watch it pop. I want to let it happen. You know, when Warhol died, I thought at that time that I should open the soup and eat it. I thought that would be a fitting kind of way to mark his passing. But I didn't. I kept it, and it was going to pop. I wanted to do something with it. So I decided to build this sealed case for it, vitrine for it. And I got it about 3/4 done. I was in my studio, and I looked down at the can. I was just about to test fit it, and there was stuff starting to emerge from a little pinhole on one side. Oh, man. So I slammed it in the container, put the top and bottom on. It's sealed, all sealed up with epoxies, and clamped it. It's not all that stable and solidly mounted in there. It's a little bit, you know, tenuous. Anything could happen. It could be a disaster. And no sooner did I get it in than you can see just here, and if I sort of shows here, it started to spray out the side. And then it grew mold and gunk, and things happened through the bottom. And it was just it wasn't pretty, you know. Well, Warhol did his disaster series, you know, with the automobile disasters and the tuna fish disaster. So he was involved with disasters and stuff. So I just called this Warhol disaster and let it be. And eventually it stabilized in terms of the decay because it used up all the available oxygen. And now I haven't looked at it recently, but it's because it's in a crate. I think it's just sitting in there sort of, you know, quietly. Well, it's preserved again. Who knows? That's the Warhol disaster. What happens in a state of not so much disaster, but more accurately catastrophe, is that you get a rapid change from one state of being to another. In that rapid change, many things are possible. In the shift between knowing and not knowing, things can open up. And so I'm interested in these catastrophic moments, but they pass so quickly, that's a problem. Maybe I could extend it. This work is called Umbilicus. And, the other thing is that this was done at a time, you know, when the big video projections that are very hot property these days were just sort of blossoming forth. Everybody's making big video projections. And of course, I had been for a long time interested in ideas of spectacular culture and playing critical culture against spectacular culture. I'd been reading, some of you may have heard of the writer named Guy Debord, who wrote a book, late 50s, early 60s, called The Society of the Spectacle, that talked about the way that spectacular society, in fact, shuts down our thinking processes. So I'm always interested in ways to interject consciousness against that. And so I was also interested in making this little video piece. And rather than having it be a big video projection, I decided to go absolutely the other way. And I found these little video monitors that are this big. And they're really crappy quality, but they carry an image. And so that's what this is. The piece is called Umbilicus. It's on a table painted bridge green. And I took the moment. How many of you have seen Tacoma Narrows Bridge film? That's most people have. It's like pretty common film. And it was this bridge in Tacoma, Washington that was engineered not taking into account the harmonics of the wind and what the wind could do. And it started vibrating and oscillating. It built up a harmonic frequency. And eventually it just collapsed. Well, I bought the film footage, bought the rights to use a part of the film footage. And I took an excerpt from just before it went down and I looped it so it would play endlessly. Here's another version of that piece when I decided I didn't need the table. Mix things up a little bit. So I'll just give you a quick shot at this. L or Z? Z. Z. There we go. Umbilicus. Well, that's not nice. There we go. So I wanted to take that moment and just stretch it out for as long as you'd like to be in it. Okay, how are we doing? Here's another little catastrophe piece. It's a table, and this is with a pencil perched on. It's two halves of a table, just balanced against each other. They just sit there. They're very nicely finished. One half of the table is 4 inches shorter than the other half, so that even if you put them together, you couldn't put them together. Okay, and then this is, before showing this, we'll look at, where is it? This one. So that's from footage that I shot in 1993 of a building being demolished in downtown Vancouver. And I was using that footage to again reiterate this kind of endless catastrophic moment. And I finally finished that video pretty much as you see it there about 2 weeks before the Twin Towers in New York were hit. And that was just, the end of that piece for a little while. And then about 6 or 7 months later, the rhetoric around 9/11 was getting so lopsided that I thought I should bring it back out, work it into the piece that I wanted to make, and just put it out there anyway, because at the very least, although its meaning was certainly changed, it would complicate things. So, and this is the form that it ended up in. Each of these little boxes contains one of the electronic components needed to deliver the image. So I blew apart the sound, the amplifier, the speakers, the DVD player, the monitors, the volume controls, all of the various components, put each of them into its own separate little box, connected them with this rhizomic maze of wires, and used that as the device to play the work back. You can see it there. And again, the video monitor is about this big. So it's a crummy little image. Another thing that happens when I'm working is that there are little things off the side. Things come off the side of of the workbench, leftovers. And over years, I've hung on to them. And for a long time, I had a whole wall of my studio, about as big as this screen, with like these little bits pinned to it. So this is like an onion that somehow got really dried out. And there's lead poured into it here. I made a little shelf for it. This is a leaf with a little bit of black epoxy laid into it. Tiny little things. They're not art yet. They're not art. Maybe they're never art. But there were little kind of uninhibited bits of stuff that I made just for the pleasure of making it. And eventually, they led me to something. And they led me to this work, which is called Anyway. Because they're all little things that I made anyway. And I put them together, put a number of them together into this situation where I constructed a plinth specifically for each of these little Anyway objects. And here's one. The object here is a little piece of bamboo skewer that I had broken at some point. And when I broke it, it was sitting in a perfect 90-degree angle, and the break was just exquisite. And I kept it. It was sitting pinned to my studio wall for, gosh, 4 or 5. I just said gosh, didn't I? How very professional. For 4 or 5 years. And then it ended up on the top of this plinth. Here's another one. It was really fun. It was just like an act of total creative pleasure making these. This is a bit of wire from an architectural parallel rule. And I was just fiddling with an end of it and unraveled it, and unraveled kind of elegantly. A bit of lathe swarf on a bit of veneer. And of course, the veneer is on top of its own use. 4 little metal shavings from some lathe work I was doing. Exquisitely delicate, beautiful things. So hey, when you're in a meeting or in a class and you've got a paper clip and you bend it and you make an interesting shape out of it and you think, that's cool. You chuck it. When we're creative, I was thinking about this afterwards and just trying to unravel why I liked this whole thing, ideas so much. But when we're creative, when we're making our art, when we're doing stuff like that, we're so completely boxed in by the things we aren't thinking about, like our preconceived ideas about what art is, about what matters for art, our ideas about what's legitimate as art, what's not legitimate, our ideas about what's appropriate or what's not appropriate. And so the very force of our creative activity, in a sense, is constrained by all these things that we don't think about. They're just built in, Like a fish doesn't think about water. We're in this mess of limitations. So when you're sitting in a meeting and you bend a paperclip into an interesting shape, that in a way, because it's not art, it's not anything, you're going to throw it away. That in a way is this really maybe important creative moment, because you're working in a very unconstrained way. And when Freud, when we think of the notion of the Freudian slip, in the Freudian, we assume a kind of truth to be emerging through the Freudian slip in language. And in the Freudian slip, what is to be happening, as it's described, but that our unconscious mind bursts forth through the cracks in controlled and constrained speech and language. So the Freudian slip gets at maybe a better truth, or that's the connotation of it, right? Similarly, I started to think of these things as being the Freudian slips of the object world. They slip through all our creative constraints. They allow us to do things we might not otherwise be able to do. Maybe in themselves they're not very important, but they can be kind of beautiful to look at, beautiful to be with, and maybe even finally, conceptually and imaginatively, more important than the carefully constructed thought that we had. Here's some more play. This is a collaboration work done with my daughter when she was 2.5 years old. she was sort of an unconstrained creator too, I guess. And I'll play you this.
Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Ha 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 ha. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Ha 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 ha. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Ha 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 ha. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Ha 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 ha. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream.
So I asked her to sing that section of the song. The grace notes were her own addition. And I thought I had no right whatsoever to tamper with that, so I just put them in there. And then I showed actually an earlier version of that in LA. And so Cleo had her first international professional art exhibition when she was about 4 years old. It's not so bad. Okay, where are we at here? We'll go down to 45. I think that's it. Oh, okay. Well, just so I don't have to go in and out of the two programs, I'll talk about the next two pieces. More singing stuff. This is like my idea of a painting, but it's also a video panel. I'll show you the video of it and play it. I was outside the EMP, Experience Music Project in Seattle, designed by Frank Gehry. And outside they had these large posts with speakers mounted, and they were playing tunes. And there was a band called Air Band playing this song, Radio Number One. And I mistook the lyrics. I thought it was singing Baby, You're Number One. So using my digital still camera, because why have just crummy quality monitors when you can get crummy quality source footage too? So I just recorded this thing with, like, it was an, Canon G1, 15 frames a second, 30 seconds of video. Really low grade. Recorded this thing playing its music. And then I dubbed my own voice over top of it, singing Baby, You're Number One. So it doesn't carry fully in the, I think, in the video, but when it's playing, there are two speakers mounted in the back, because it's stereo sound. And one is playing the original song, and the other is playing my version of it. And they kind of duke it out, I usually lose, which is, Actually, I shouldn't say that, because some people hear one thing, some people hear another, and some people hear a combination of them. So the work is called Sing to Me, Baby. And this is another endless looping piece. I showed this in South Alberta. A woman named Joan Stebbins, who was the curator at the time, had her office right next to it. She was kind of worried because she was going to have to listen to this all day, every day for about a month. And she told me that when she was done, she quite liked it. She quite missed it when it was gone. Maybe that just, maybe Joan isn't as smart as I always thought she was. But no, she is. Joan is, she's absolutely great. And this work is called Turny Girl. And again, I'm looping back into these images the relationship between image and object. So what happens with this, and I'll show you video footage, is that it rotates. But the figure, who's mounted on a bigger monitor this time, counter-rotates. So it's as though this person is standing fixed, and you're walking around her like this. Does that make sense? The two movements cancel each other out.
Baby, you're number one. Baby, you're
Attorney girl. Yeah, sorry about my name all over everything. That was, footage meant to be sent out, so. So I was interested in the in this relationship between the image and the object, and the way that we might form an all-round perception of a figure through this kind of scan. But I was also very aware of some other issues at play, and one of them is that of the older male artist once again taking pictures of the young female student. And for that, I was really happy to work with Simon Fraser, who is the woman in the image, because she's perfectly nice, but she comes across as being totally grumpy. And she doesn't give anything back to the gaze. You know, there's the traditional critique of the male gaze as a dominating and possessing gaze and objectifying gaze. We probably all know this discourse pretty well. But in a way, I'm enacting it automatically in making this. So it was great to have somebody who didn't give back to it. You know, she didn't suck up to me in any way. She's wearing her headphones. She started out when we went to do this shoot for this, and she was wearing her headphones. And I just thought, oh, that's perfect. You know, don't even listen to me. Just do this. And she doesn't pay much attention. At one point, you can't really see it in the documentation, but at one point when it goes by, her eyes looked right at the camera and then looked away again, sort of not all that interested. So it was a kind of perfect balance. And then I had to kind of make it all girl pink at that point, just to throw another twist into that. Okay, I'll show anyway a couple more works. This is my second large public commission. I did a lot of slide projection works and image projection works as public works, and some smaller other things. But this is one at a community center in Seattle, High Point Community Center. The community center is in a pretty impoverished working class neighborhood. It's on the top of a hill, 5 miles as the crow flies from downtown Seattle, but you can't see downtown Seattle from here. The community center serves as an education center, a daycare center, and a kind of stepping stone, a bridge point between this neighborhood and the larger, more prosperous urban sphere. So people come there, they get some basic education and training and literacy stuff, and it helps them to step out. Their goal is, in a way, to join this more prosperous world, but they can't even see it from where they are despite their high vantage point, so I thought I'd give them a way to see it. If you were able to sit in this little pink chair up here, 40 feet up, you would be able to see downtown Seattle. So I got a 40-foot pole, punched it through the roof. On the top, the chair is actually only this tall, so it's a forced perspective. On the bottom is more furniture, so all these domestic items. And they're 10% oversized. So they seem kind of natural, and you can go and sit in them and stuff. But when you sit in them, you're also just a little small. You're like a kid at the table. And then there's this oversized coffee cup on the table. Oh, there's more of these than I thought. And when you look into the coffee cup, what do you see but downtown Seattle? Because on the top of the pole, embedded in that little head thing or hat thing above the chair, is a high-powered video camera. And it's programmed, so it looks at downtown Seattle. And it zooms in and kind of just stops, comes back out, and wanders around the shoreline of the downtown center. And then there's a monitor embedded in the table underneath, so that as you look into the mug, you've got this live, moving image of what's going on downtown. And you know, with any public project, you never know how the public's going to receive it. The people inside the community center have built this little homage to it. And they're really stoked. They've got a sign up behind their desk saying, "Go and look in the coffee cup." And that's And if it breaks down, I hear about it within about, I think, 35 seconds. But it's been really reliable. Okay, and then these new works. Last 3 new works. Combining images from objects that come out of a manual on 19th century farm devices and a kind of raw material practice and a quotation or some near appropriation from everyday life. And in these works, I don't know what I'm doing completely with these works. I think I'm trying to bring together 3 different modes of working. They're very physical. The surfaces of this is somewhere between icing and total aggression, because they've got these prickly spines coming out of them, so you can hurt yourself on them if you touch them. But they're also kind of beautiful to look at. There's another view of this. So with that greenish object, I take the drawing, scan it, put it into a 3D CAD program, extrapolate it into this kind of anamorphic distortion, build a maquette out of foam core, coat the foam core with rosin and glass fibers. And that here is combined with collapsed aircraft honeycomb and a kind of idealized wooden sawhorse. Oh, and the titles come directly from the names of the objects in the book. So this is called Make the Horse Eat Slowly. This is Jack the Wagon. And what I'm aiming at here, it's kind of a new terrain for me, but what I'm aiming at is objects that play with recognizability, offer it, and then pull it away, and offer it a different way, and pull it away, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I'm trying to bring together things that don't necessarily belong together. It's like, I don't know, it's like you and I being locked in a closet and having to learn how to get along together. You know, it might work out, might not. But something interesting should happen. So there's this mix of materials. You know, there's on the one hand this dimensional object, then there's this machined and anodized aluminum billet, and this is a ragged blanket. Here's a detail, and here you can see the kind of prickliness of everything, and this is just like as slick as can be. Slick as can be. I also want to develop a newer kind of beauty. You know, I mean, there are many kinds of beauty, and I'm looking for a beauty that is aggressive and not aggressive at the same time. That's seductive and uncomfortable. And I'm more and more, as I work now, I'm interested in trying to develop works that don't demand legitimation by language. Because I often hear, and you know, I do it too, artists make work, this is called takes a man's place. I often hear artists talk about, or make work, and then kind of layer a rationale onto it, or work from another kind of rationale. And more and more our work needs to be, or seems to need to be, legitimized through external discourse. And on the one hand, I read at philosophy, I read at critical theory, I read at social theory, and I'm very interested in those things. At the same time, I believe that it's possible to make, through making art, it's possible to do stuff that is perceptually and visually able to offer us a kind of knowing, a consciousness, and not an uncritical consciousness either, but a consciousness that resides within the perceptual terms of visual art itself, the visuality of visual art. An art that finds its legitimacy from its own terms, not from terms that are external and laid on or accompanying it. Okay? It's a big challenge because it can just be an excuse for making things that are not well conceived. But I think it's a possibility, and it's a little bit scary and really worth working for. it's interesting to me how art is legitimated, how it finds its legitimacy through certain mechanisms. And in a way, if I think about it, I think that all of the stuff that I do as a visual artist, and this is true of most of the visual art that I see around me that really seems strong, is that it's not legitimate. That the stuff that we set out to do as artists isn't legitimate culture in a way. It's sort of illegitimate culture in a way. And I think that's really important. If you want legitimate culture, you can find it coming out of commercial art, advertising, Hollywood art, any of the art forms that are economically marketplace legitimated. They're legitimated in the popular, in popular culture, in the population at large. So what we do as artists is automatically not uncontained, and it's not so much better or different. It's implicated, it's involved, it's totally intertwined, but it's not the same kind of legitimacy. So I think that as an artist, I would like to be involved in making the bastard offspring of legitimate culture. But I use that term maybe in the sense that bastard would have been used 200 years ago in the bastard children of royalty, who may not have been legitimate children, but still occupied a very important place in the social hierarchy. So this is takes a man's place, and there's a little bit of nonsense up on the top there. It's just absolutely gorgeous, and I have no idea what it's about.
What material is that little white?
This?
Is it wax?
No, it's plastic. It's a shaving. What was I doing? I was running some Lexan through the table saw, and that emerged. And yeah. And then this is modeled after a Canadian Tire work lamp, but it's completely fabricated. And that's a good place to stop, huh? But I'd be happy to answer questions. Some more than others. The first one, make the horse eat slowly. Those three things, they're natural. That one, this holds. There's a kind of comfort amongst those three things, but it's still pretty energetic.
What's the material underneath that? Sorry, that metal?
It's aircraft honeycomb, but without the surface plate, so it's just the honeycomb mashed. And I squished it. This is not comfortable yet, but it's newer. And this one I finished like 2 days before it went in the crate. These three works are on their way to Toronto for a show right now. So I started this one first. I started this like a year and a half ago, and I finished it last. But I think those, these guys, they're talking to each other. They're doing okay. And it's gone through a lot of changes. Yeah, it's great. There's nothing more. Yeah, it dissolves into fascination at some point, and that's as good as it gets. It did, didn't it? I went through years of not being the least bit involved with color. And then I got this 2-year contract as a sessional instructor at MLA Carr. And they said, here, teach color theory. And I go, all right, one, I make objects. I know a lot more about electronics than color. So I taught color theory for 2 years. In my first class, I walked in and I told the class, and there were 20 people, and I said, look, I've never taught this before, and I don't really use color, but I'll bet I can learn faster than you, and that's what I'm going to do. And the next class, there were only 15 people. But at the end of that class, one of those 15 people said it was the best art class he'd had all year. And I did learn color, you know. And I worked really hard at that, and it worked out okay, you know. I think it was better the second time I taught it. And it was about 2 years after that, I just thought, I want some color. So I think it's that serendipitous. I'm really happy with color now. And these latest colors, the color reproduction here is actually pretty good. They're all kind of bad. And the colors of the plinths in the Anyway series, they're all a little bit off. The plinth colors are originally quotations from a set of plastic chopsticks that were made in Hong Kong. And it was like, the blue is blue, but it's not quite a clean blue. There's something a little bit sick about each of the colors. And so there again, you know, the beauty of the color and a kind of awkwardness that I'm interested in. Yeah, I have thought about it very carefully, and I do use it now as a design element. I can't get rid of it, you know, so it should be there. And there's some good chords around. They're not so hard to use, and yeah. It's like having parents. You can't get rid of them either. Yes?
You pick the colors of your chords to match like what you're doing, right?
Well, I think about it. It's not always a match, but yeah.
Okay. Do you have a lot of options in terms of the chord color?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Some of my chords are microphone cable. You have 4-strand microphone cable, and then I double up, and shielded, and I double up the strands to give me enough wire gauge to carry the current required. But now there's some available, and I'll just flip back here. This stuff, it's like a kind of mesh. Oh, God, way back. And it's like the netting that onions come in, but much finer scale than that. And you can put it over bundles of electrical wire or electrical wire. And that's what I've used here. And it comes in a variety of colors. So the other thing you can do is you can get climbing rope and pull out the core and use the outer shell. And then you got like string for chord. The pillar by the little umbilicus video?
With the little tiny video.
Yeah, that was actually a Montreal.
Was it a Montreal?
Yeah, it was a French horse. Good guess. Obviously, you've been to open space, and you know it's history, right? No, I set up a post in my studio, and I started walking around it. And I walked around it about 100 times with a watch going, and then calculated it on that basis. And I just stayed, you know, sort of this far apart, estimated what a good viewing distance might be. And it's actually very versatile, because if you can't go that fast, you just get closer.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, if there weren't, I wouldn't be able, you know, then I could just get a job and make money. No, there has to be play in there. I also, when I was making this, in order to get the video worked out, I had a plinth about this big sitting in my studio, and a Volkswagen windshield wiper motor, and a couple of wooden shims, and a record player turntable all tied together, and I put my computer on top of that, and had it playing, and walked around, you know, to make sure it was going to work. It seemed to work pretty well, so I stood back over here, to see what it would look like from a distance. And then the computer went, yeah! And there were parts everywhere. And yeah. I was really glad that I'd paid $300 for the extra warranty, because they came and fixed it. Except parts of it are held together with muffler tape. Yeah, it's the pleasure of play and working in the studio. If I didn't get to make stuff in both a disciplined and undisciplined way, there'd be no point. It's really about the hands-on materiality of it. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. On the other hand, teaching is a great way to think things through and to develop my ideas and to be in touch with people who are thinking and are alive. And I won't stop teaching. I would like to, depends. I'm doing administrative work now. Normally I just teach and make my work. Ideal schedules might not have me teaching quite as many hours, but it affords me the money I need to make work, and I totally get off on it. There's nothing better than working with students and